You're listening to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast, episode 40 in early October 2021. Today I talk about the third year for classic hardcovers with guest Tony Whitt, The Spirit of 1976. I have two outrageous offers that will eat up 2 mortgage payments. And I review again how to protect those classic hardcovers. Ready to go? Then may I present the great Fraser Hines.
They all say who is Doctor Who? Where is he from? What does he do? They wonder who is Doctor Who? So I ask you, who's Doctor Who?
Welcome back to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast, the podcast that explores the classic world of Doctor Who collecting, those who collect, issues surrounding Doctor Who collecting, and of course, all kinds of Doctor Who merchandise. I am Larry Van Mersbergen, your host, and I have been collecting Doctor Who now since 1981. I did open one of the first stores dedicated to Doctor Who and Doctor Who fans back in 1984 in Chicago, called Bundles from Britain. We were in the dealer's room at TARDIS 22 in November of 1985. And I will never forget John Pertwee coming to our table and saying, "Look at all this stuff." We are mentioned in a great book, by the way, called Red, White, and Who, The Story of Doctor Who in America. Bundles from Britain lives on page 384. You can find a link to buy this book directly on the front page of our website at drwhocollectors.com. We don't get any money for this book, but we think all collectors should have it. I am excited to announce that as of this recording, we are now part of the new Direction Point Doctor Who Podcast Network. You can find great Doctor Who podcasts at directionpoint.org. If you happen to be a Doctor Who podcaster, join today. Speaking of links, of course, and other things, 2 great resources for collectors. I want to point out timelash.com, the TARDIS book library, and more than just books. You can keep track of your books, your vinyl, your CD collection for absolutely free. Just sign up for a free account there, with special thanks to Dan O'Malley, a friend of the podcast. If you're not sure what you might have or want to figure out a possible value or even look up what's available in the world, the vast world of Doctor Who, then you need to look no further than Howe's Transcendental Toy Box at drwhotoybox.co.uk. David J. Howe is, of course, a great author in the world of Doctor Who and a good friend of ours as well, and one of the best resources for collectors. Of course, if you are looking for great Doctor Who items, classic items especially, at great prices, look no further than DoctorWhoStore.com. Alien Entertainment has what you need. You can also find great Doctor Who items at Forbidden Planet, which is one of our sponsors. And if you come to our website at drwhocollectors.com, click on the merchandise link, and the latest and greatest from Forbidden Planet is there for you to browse or purchase. Anything purchased through our website does help benefit the podcast. You pay the same price, they pay us to stay on the air. It's a great deal. Also, if you visit our website, you can visit the great complete guide to Doctor Who classic hardcover books. I was honored to see a screenshot on a Facebook post that said, "I agree with the author of this, that this is the rarest hardcover issue ever, because I've never seen one." So I was very pleased to see that it is actually helping people. We have many reprints, of course, that many collectors aren't even aware of. I do want to take up this moment here, another moment, to suggest politely that every Doctor Who fan get their COVID-19 vaccine, because you're going to need proof of that vaccine or a negative COVID test within 72 hours prior of attending Chicago TARDIS 2021, returning to an in-person convention this Thanksgiving weekend. Face coverings will be required in all convention venues as of this taping. And please help us to protect our aging Doctor Who actors such as Colin Baker, Michael Jaston, and Fraser Hines. Yes, I said Michael Jaston. The Valeyard himself will be there. More guests, of course, are on the program. To find out the full list, go to chicagotardis.com and experience the best Doctor Who convention in the Midwest. I am honored by Chicago TARDIS to be the official collecting expert. So stop and see my collecting panel, which I discuss and bring many items from my collection for up-close inspection, so you can get an idea of what there is that's out there. And of course, you learn from the mistakes that I have made and other collectors have made over the years. We're also going to do a panel on the War of the Daleks, a workshop, more likely, where we've got 2 fully working games, and we're hoping people will come out to play. By the way, I forgot to mention, if you want to see the collecting panel from 2020 Chicago TARDIS, which was an all-virtual experience, just go to YouTube and search for the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast channel and go to Playlists, and you'll find it first in that selection there. You can also find it on the playlists of Chicago TARDIS's YouTube page and their Facebook page. I'm also planning to moderate a panel discussion on the movie An Adventure in Space and Time that featured David Bradley as William Hartnell. Our theme song is Who's Doctor Who, composed by Barry Mason and Les Reed, performed by Fraser Hines, who will also be a guest at Chicago TARDIS. You can hear this podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, including Stitcher Radio and Podbean. And you can find this wherever podcasts are found. You should also, by the way, want to point out to another great podcast that is now part of the Direction Point Network, and that is Time Streams, hosted by my good friend Nathan Laws. They recently did a deep dive into the first season of Doctor Who from 1963, and I honestly could not stop listening. It was really well put together. They're also part of that great network. So after the break, we'll have our main story, collection protection, and 2 most outrageous offers. Stay tuned.
I would like to invite you to take a trip across all of time and space.
Join us in the police box as we discuss the worlds of Doctor Who in a completely random order.
We discuss it all: TV stories, audio adventures, novels, nonfiction books, and on and on. I'm your host, Eric Branson. I would be very happy if you join me for the Police Box in the Junkyard podcast.
The Police Box in the Junkyard podcast is a proud partner of the Video Junkyard podcast and can be found on most major podcast platforms including SoundCloud, Podcast Addict, Stitcher Radio, Google Play, and Spotify.
You are listening to
The Doctor Who Collectors Podcast.
Hello, fellow time travelers, and welcome to the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, the only podcast to discuss, in story order, all the Doctor Who novelizations. My name is Tony Whitt, and every 2 weeks or so, I'm joined by a 2 to 3 person discussion panel, including our so-called expert who's been a Who fan since 1979. That would be me. We also get the views of intermediate, casual, and novice fans who either have never seen the show or who have never read these books until these podcasts, including
Dalton Hughes
and
Alison Fitz-Seyfried.
You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you find good podcasts, or even ones like ours. You are listening to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast, a Direction Point podcast. Keep collecting.
Up there is the scanner, those are the doors, that is a chair with a panda on it. Sheer poetry, dear boy.
And now it's time for the main story. This is a continuation of the classic Doctor Who hardcovers that we did back in March of 2020. We covered the 1974 and 1975 years of Allan Wingate, and of course it was easy to cover those 2 years because only 4 titles were published. So, Allan Wingate, by the way, which is an imprint of Universal Tandem, only issued 2 books for each of those years, and the only books that were published by Allan Wingate in those 2 years, as you recall, was Doctor Who. So we start now in 1976, where the number of books jumps to 10 books and 1 reprint on the Allan Wingate imprint. After this, there will only be one more year of the Allan Wingate imprint, and it will then become Wingate Longbow before it moves over to W.H. Allen. So in 1973, just to give you a little history, my listeners, Tandem established Target Books as a children's imprint. However, Target became well known for its highly successful range of novelizations and other books based on Doctor Who. In fact, it became exclusively Doctor Who shortly after. In 1975, Universal Tandem was sold by the UPD Group to the British conglomerate Howard and Wyndham, and the company was renamed Tandem Publishing Limited, before being merged with the paperback imprint of Howard and Wyndham's general publishing house, W.H. Allen, to become Wyndham Publications Limited in 1976. So that's, if you're curious why Wingate becomes W.H. Allen, there's your answer right there. So during 77 and 78, the Wyndham identity was completely phased out, and the Tandem imprint was phased out during 1980. Surviving titles from the backlist were subsequently printed under W.H. Allen's principal paperback imprint, Star Books. The Target imprint, of course, survives until 1993. The later years were exclusively used for Doctor Who novelizations. And of course, anytime we talk about Doctor Who novelizations on the Doctor Who Collectors podcast, I received subpoenas here from Think Tank and the Tobias Vaughan Corporation to include our resident Doctor Who novel specialist, the host and producer of the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, the incomparable Tony Whitt. Welcome back to the podcast, my friend.
Hello, fellow. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. Force the habit. Force the habit. Sorry. Hello, Larry. How are you doing?
Oh, doing great. No, I always enjoy that. In fact, I just wrapped up finishing the episode on the Rebos operation.
Oh, yeah.
And looking forward to the Pirate Planet. So
Yes, we're going to be recording that this weekend, and we're all a little fearful, because this is the first time we will have compared two versions of the same story,
Yes.
two different novelizations, even though there are technically three.
Right,
and
right.
Allison in particular is kind of screeching about the amount of work we're having to put her through.
Yeah, unfortunately, that goes with the podcast. I mean, I actually this whole information that we just started here with Allan Wingate, it's not easy to find, because I'll let you know as well as the listeners. When I Googled Allan Wingate, the third search choice that came up from Google is my own website, because I cite Allan Wingate in my Doctor Who hardcover guide, and I thought there isn't a lot out there.
No.
If it's and so it's there was a couple of Library of Congress articles about the publisher and books that came up by them that were notable over the years, but that was about it. So finding the history, kind of, and all these different, I don't know if you heard me talk about Star Books, but there were
Yes,
actually
I did.
some Doctor Who books were released under Star Books.
Yes, as double volumes, weren't they?
Yes, exactly. So that was what when I saw that, I thought, there we go. And it's a Universal Tandem is a huge publishing house, and they now own several imprints, and a lot of those imprints are going away. Even W.H. Allen's imprint is no longer used. So it's really interesting. Of course, also great to hear that also that you and I are part of this new exciting Doctor Who podcast network called Direction Point.
Yes.
And we are very excited about this. Direction Point is helping podcasters approach to networking and using each other's audiences to gain further listeners. So the reason, the idea came to me after doing the combined podcast that we did with the Target Book Club podcast. I had a lot of great emails back from my own listeners who said, well, at first we were a little lost, but it kind of sucked them into that conversation. So I'm sure now a few of those people have clicked the subscribe button on your podcast.
Mm-hmm. I have seen an uptick in numbers, so I can definitely attest to this.
So already we're off and running. So if you want to find out more, and of course our partner podcasts are located at directionpoint.org. You can also find us on Facebook at Direction Point, and soon all of our podcasts will be available on the Facebook page as well as through Direction Point, and anywhere you get your podcasts, you'll be able to find all of us. And of course, if you are listening and you are a Doctor Who podcaster, check us out at directionpoint.org. We are here to help you. Of course, the publication of 10 Doctor Who books is 5 times the number of books they published in subsequent years. So obviously in 1976, the marketing department there said, wait, we're getting a lot of sales on these books. Maybe we should pump out a few more. And the Target book publications of 1976 mirror the hardcovers. It's one of the few years where that happens. And just listeners, again, just to let you know, not every Doctor Who novelization was released in hardcover. In the early years, there were more released, and then they slowly phased out over time. So in 73, there were 3 in 73, there were 7 in 74, 7 in 75 for Target books. The hardcovers are now keeping pace with the paperbacks and will rise to 12 to 13 a year until the hardcover runs in 1988, where the Target book run runs a few years later. These hardcovers are extremely sought after, and again, I mentioned in the preview, you might have to mortgage your house to afford some of these nowadays. But they can be found in a couple ways. I reference these condition terms just so you're understanding what we're doing. Some are called ex-library editions, and that means these books were once in a public library and they were pulled from circulation and probably sold at a book fair for maybe under $1 or $2 or whatever to some lucky person who took that dollar book and turned it into several $100s later. And also there is the, actually I put my notes here, it's either pulled from a library or stolen from a library. that has been known to happen.
Yes.
Or of course a non-library edition, which was either a retail store or a bookstore or sometimes direct from the publisher. But those are few and far between. They were not distributed in the United States until 1985. And, of course, that's, you all know my story by now, but the company I ran back in 85 was Bundles from Britain, and we were the sole retailer for all of the Doctor Who hardcovers that were available at that time. And we had those until they were gone in 1986, because the American distributor, Lyle Stewart, stopped importing them in 1986, saying that no one was buying them. So it's really something. Now, today, I see these books selling for a lot of money. And of course, in 1976, Target books weren't even available in the United States. And of course, 1976, that was our bicentennial year. Any memories from that year, Tony?
Very vague ones, because I was only 6 at the time. I remember DC and Marvel Comics doing particular things for the bicentennial, but that's literally all I remember.
I do remember being in grade school. I think I was 7 at the time, and I remember we stood outside with our American flags, and all our teachers had the Uncle Sam hats, and we all enjoyed the movie 1976 with David Cassidy, which I think they're going to do on the Video Junkyard podcast. It's that bad.
It's really horrible.
But that's about my memory of 1976. Of course, I had already been watching Doctor Who for a full year that year. So John Pertwee episodes were airing in Chicago in 1976. I do recall seeing those every Friday night from 7 to 7:30. And actually going back through the library of Chicago Tribune TV listings, I confirmed that was the time that they were shown on Channel 11. So I do, to the books now. So in 1976, just to let you know, all of the books were sold with dust jackets. And that's important to know. So we started off in January. The book was Doctor Who and the Loch Ness Monster, based on Terror of the Zygons, written by Terrence Dix. And this one has a distinction of having a blue spine, which identifies the first edition copy. So if you have a copy of the Loch Ness Monster in hardcover with a blue colored spine, that is a first edition.
And you're set for life.
Yes, pretty much, because I haven't seen one ever, and I don't have one. But they're very. I would use the rare word on that one because I've just never seen one for sale. The price, of course, in 1975 was £2.25, which in today's U.S. dollars would be $27.50. So today, that book could fetch as much as $800 in ex-library condition.
Oh.
In other words, if it's kind of got a library wrapper on it or a sticker in the front or a pocket for the checkout card, you're looking at some serious money. A non-library edition, I can't even guess because I haven't seen one. And at least in the last 10 years is the last time anyone has reported seeing one. Sadly, not in my collection. But Doctor and the Loch Ness Monster, what were your thoughts on that story, Tony?
Well, I can tell you that was a fair to middling story for us. Dalton gave it a 3.75, Allison gave it a 3, and I gave it a 3.75. It was one of those books that we enjoyed, but I was able to say that the book really doesn't live up to the televised story, which is almost always the case, but with a story like Loch Ness Monster, you really, really wanted to. That being said, the fact that they gave it 3.75s is telling that somehow it still comes through on the page.
Yeah, I did read it a long time ago, but I remember my favorite line in the book, of course, was, prepare to receive a message from Commander Broton. The Doctor lets out a loud and vulgar raspberry.
Yes, exactly.
It's great. I thought, because that wasn't on screen.
No.
But I just thought Tom Baker would have done that if it had been scripted. But that's quite a story. And of course, the reason we're not seeing this book is it sold pretty well, being the first, hardcover of the year, and coming out under, the new logo, of course, with the artwork, same as the Target book. They came out at the same time. And it sold very well. Of course, this is the first hardcover to be reprinted. So in August of 76, a second edition and a third edition was put out also in the same month of January 1976.
Oh my.
So proof of life on the third edition is still pending. I've had a few people say they think they have one, but I'm waiting to see the proof of that. I asked them to send a copy of the cover and the inside page with the printing history. So I'm still waiting on that, but that is what the information I have through W.H. Allen says, that there was a planned third edition. We don't know if it got printed. That's only rumored.
See.
Of course, this time the reprint is easy to identify because it was reprinted with a white spine, not the blue spine. So if you have the blue spine, you've got the first edition. If you have one with a white spine, now the third edition is also rumored to say Wingate Longbow on the side, and that's how you know it's a third printing. So each printing is distinctive in itself. The value of the second or third edition is pretty much like the first because none of them have been seen either. And this is the first time. Not many have been reported to be in circulation. I don't have any copies of this in hardcover in my collection. I have several of the Target books. So can you believe that this is, these books are selling for this much money, Tony?
I wish I'd known it back when, I had a chance to actually possibly get one. But I never had a chance to get this one. In fact, I didn't even know about the blue spine, though. It is interesting to note that if you have this book with the blue spine, you've got a first edition, and you're guaranteed a month's run at some point in the future.
Absolutely, and I guarantee it would probably sell for much more than $800. I mean,
oh yeah,
people are. I mean, just I've watched as kind of a professional insight. I put up the watch list on eBay on certain things to see where they go. And there was a copy of Genesis of the Daleks, which we'll get to in a few minutes here, that actually went for £925 sterling.
You're kidding me.
Ex-library copy on eBay.
That's insane.
Exactly. So that's why this particular season of Target books, that's why I said mortgage payment, because we're actually maybe even 2 mortgage payments by the time we're done. But just crazy stuff. Of course, we move on to February of 1976, and 2 books were printed. The first one was Doctor Who and the Dinosaur Invasion, based on Invasion of the Dinosaurs. And just for my guest here, and I'll put this on YouTube, I have a copy of this one. It's an ex-library edition by Malcolm Hoke, and there's nothing distinguishing about the book, so it's not easily identified as a first or second edition without checking the inside. It's very hard to find even in non-library condition or for that matter. Ex-libraries are common. You can expect to pay up to $300 for an ex-library copy. So what about this story? This goes back on the podcast a few episodes.
Yeah, in fact, we had Trey Corte as a guest for that particular one, and both Trey and I gave it a 4 out of 5. Dalton gave it a 3.5. Allison gave it a 2.5, which at the time was fairly high for her. The main thing we remember about the book is that even though it is an incredibly flawed novelization, it's not Malcolm Hulke at its best, it is still Malcolm Hulke, and
Yes.
he is always worth the money you pay to read. And yeah, I can see why having this in hardback would be quite the achievement.
Yeah, it's a really nice copy, and of course on the inside flap is a wonderful biography, a little bio of Malcolm Hulke, and of course there's a little bit of a, like what would be on the back of the Target book for the blurb. On the back of this hardcover, and I'll hold it up so you can see it there, and I'll put it up there, is also a list of other books that are in print. So sometimes when you're looking at, when I was doing my research on the hardcovers, having them and then looking at this list kind of gave me an idea of what the prices were. Of course, these were all £2.25, by the way. I'll just say the whole series in that year never changed price. But it also gave me an idea what they were promoting and what they were trying to sell. And these are the books that, and some of these books, the books on the back here were Planet of the Spiders, which was already in print from the previous year, as well as The Three Doctors. They have the Loch Ness Monster, which is the previous printing, and then the next future printing would be The 10th Planet. So that kind of gave you an idea of what was coming out. And that's a really nice copy of the book. I've had this one for a number of years. This one I found in the late 80s.
I have a question for you about
Sure,
that.
go ahead.
That back cover, do you prefer it to, well, most times whenever a publishing company tells you what's being published by their company in hardback, they'll do it in pages within the book itself. They generally won't put it on the back cover. And instead, as we know from the Target Book Club podcast, they'll instead put a blurb telling us what the story is about. Do you yourself have any problems with them having listed books on the back rather than a blurb as they would normally do?
Yes, and the reason for that is sometimes the book doesn't have the dust jacket. And so without the dust jacket, you don't get this list. And so it would have been nice. And just for that, I'm gonna pop this one out of the bag real quick here so I can take a look at the inside. So this is what we do. There's no editing here, folks. This is what we do.
Is it bigger on the inside?
It might, well, it might be. No, actually, it's interesting. In the back pages here, there's nothing. It just ends the story. But in the inside back flap is the Malcolm Hulke biography.
Right.
And on the inside flap is the ISBN number and the blurb.
Okay.
So,
is he the only one that gets a biography like that in a hardback?
actually, no. It's been a year since we did the last one, but there was one for Terrence Dix in the Three Doctors.
Okay, all right.
That's kind of the unique part of these old hardcovers is that they did this in this way. And of course, the book itself. Let me just pop the flap off carefully here so you can get an idea. It's just a blue cloth, and then there's a gold imprint on the side.
I love the gold printing, though.
Oh, it's very nice, and they even have Wingate stamped at the bottom. But it's really nice. So even if you got rid of the dust jackets or you protected them separately, the books would look amazing on the shelf just with the cloth bound. They're very nicely made, and for £2.25, which considerably just back in those days, that was a little bit of an investment back then.
Yeah.
And of course, they also illustrate. I also noticed too, whenever they publish a book that is not in the current season, they put the changing face of Doctor Who, and the illustration in the front shows the third Doctor, just so that you're not confused with all that. Of course, and I'll share with my listeners. The first time, I saw a Tom Baker episode, I was extremely confused because I had been watching John Pertwee's Doctor all through the early 70s, and then there was a little break in TV, and then I saw, well, Doctor Who's back, I'll catch it, and I was completely lost. And then a few days later, they showed the beginning of Robot, and I saw the regeneration, and I go, okay, now I'm there. And of course, thoroughly enjoyed all the Tom Baker episodes after that. So it was kind of a moment of and then of course later in the 80s, buying my first Doctor Who magazine, and there's Peter Davison on the cover going, who's this guy? And I figured, okay, they're going to change again. But we were in the end. There was that period, and I talked about this on the last podcast we did together, is that this endless loop of Robot to Invasion of Time happened in Chicago forever. And then finally they moved it to Sunday nights and started with the Rebos operation. And then finally we got to see the rest of it. But it's really cool. These books really kind of bring that back. The next book that came out here is Doctor Who and the 10th Planet. And that's by Jerry Davis. This was also given 2 printings. The second printing was in January of 1977. And that is, this one is the first edition of the 10th Planet. There is nothing on the back cover. It is plain. Just has the Wingate on the bottom. The identifying factors is if you have a second edition, it will say Wingate Longbow on the bottom, because Longbow became an imprint a year later, and that's when they started putting those on there. The first, of course, on the front cover, it says the first Cybermen story, which it also does on the Target book.
It does indeed.
Nothing really different there. The same goes for that. Ex-library copies could fetch about $200 and up, and a non-library copy $500 and up. And I've seen them out there. A couple of weeks ago, somebody had one of these on eBay, a first edition, and it sold for close to $500.
Wow.
Just amazing how that works. How about this story?
That is probably one of the few that I would want to have in hardback, because both Dalton and I gave that 4 out of 5 stars. Okay. Allison gave it 2.5, but that was for different reasons, I believe. We really enjoyed that book, and I think it's still possibly, apart from Tomb of the Cybermen, the only Jerry Davis book I actually think is worth reading.
Oh, I've read Tomb. Yeah, it's and then just opening this up, the flap, of course, includes Jerry Davis and his bio, which is really nice, and the inside flap does have a little blurb about the story, and there are no other advertising pages in this particular novel, but it's nice that they put pictures of the authors in there. That was something they did typically with hardcover books, and it's the same kind of thing with the cloth. It's cloth with the gold lettering, which is really nice. And this is an ex-library copy, but it does not have the pockets in there. They're not. When I got this one, I remember it had the plastic cover around it completely. So I do this regularly, and I'm intended to my listeners. I've gotten a lot of emails. Could you show us how to do this? And I will. I have some special equipment I got from a library company, how to remove those. So I was able to remove the cover, so I have just the book, and the book is in excellent condition without that plastic wrap really protected the dust jacket.
I may have to get to you then, because I've got a copy of Doctor Who and an Exciting Adventure with the Daleks that has that wrapping on it.
Oh, I'm more than happy to help you with that. That's
fantastic.
And the tape they typically used didn't harm the book, so it was real easy to remove without tearing the book. It's a special tape they use in library binding when they go to repair pages. That way, if they want to take the tape out and replace it, it won't rip the pages like Scotch tape would. So it's really quite amazing.
Right.
The book basically has a few it looks like some pencil indentations on the front, but that's about it. It's a beautiful book. And then, like I said, that one you'll pay some money for that one. In March of 1976, we moved to Doctor Who and the Ice Warriors by Brian Hales. I do have that one in my collection here. The price is the same, £2.25. The same dust cover, nothing distinguishing it from the first edition or the rumored second edition. The second edition is only a rumor at this point. According to publication records, a second edition was done later that year, but there's no proof of life. So again, listeners, if you have a second edition, shoot us an email at drwhocollectorspodcast@gmail.com, picture of the cover and the inside page, and I'll definitely credit you, because I do credit someone later in this podcast who sent me a second edition proof of life. You can expect to pay $350 for an ex-library copy, and much more for non-library copies. In fact, very few non-library copies exist. I should note that if you can actually pay much less if the dust jacket is missing. Sometimes if you go onto Abe's books and look around, you'll see Doctor Who hardcovers that say dust jacket missing, and that's why the book is $30. So if you're just looking for a copy of the hardback without the dust jacket, just for reading or whatever, even collecting value, you can get it for a little less if you just look around and see if it's missing a dust jacket. This one, it's 1977 according to this had a reprint, but no proof as of yet. I've always enjoyed Brian Hale's books, but what did you guys think of the Ice Warriors?
We had some divergence of opinion on that one because this is one of the Brian Hale's books I actually enjoy because the Paladon books do. Well, the one Paladon book does nothing for me. In fact, I can't stand Paladon. But
Gotcha.
I gave this one a 4.5, which is one of the highest ratings I've given to something. Dalton gave it a 3.5, and his are usually near my rating or higher. And Allison gave it a 2.5, and at one point she said this book was like a warm beer on a hot day.
Okay.
So it had that level of enjoyment for her.
So no ice.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I opened the book up, and of course this one does include a wonderful picture of Mr. Hales with a little biography. And this book also has on the back other editions that are available, and including here the Three Doctors, the Loch Ness Monster, probably the reprint at this point, and the Dinosaur Invasion, which are all previous releases. This book also has on the inside cover another list of books. It looks like somebody used it as a checklist because it's marked up. But other books by Allan Wingate include The Story of the Loch Ness Monster by Tim Tinsdale, the Creepy Crawly book, the Pony Plot, The Secret of the Missing Foal, and then some Doctor Who books, which are crossed out, which means the person who had this one had the other ones. Also Doctor Who and the 10th Planet, Doctor Who and the Dinosaur Invasion, The Mountains, The Great March West by Terrance Dicks, and The Mounties, Massacre in the Hills by Terrance Dicks. So other Terrance Dicks books. That's highly interesting.
I have to wonder whether or not any Doctor Who fans out there have tried to track down those other books of his, because I frankly have not seen them anywhere, and I don't even know if they'd be worth tracking down to try to read, or much less collect.
Every once in a while, when I do an author search on Abe's books, a non-Doctor Who book comes up for Terrance Dicks, but it's way beyond my budget. It's apparently people have caught on that his other books might be popular, and so as a result, those other books are very hard to find. They were also published in paperback, but they're very difficult to find. It's like the book that Malcolm Hulke wrote on how to write a TV script. And,
oh God, yes, that goes for thousands of dollars, doesn't it?
Oh yes, and even just on a different note, somebody is selling the Peter Haining file. Apparently, all his handwritten notes that he did for the Key to Time, and it's $2,000 if you want his notebook of an expandable file of all the stuff that he did to write that book. I don't know where the person got it from, but
good God,
what a find.
It wasn't even that great a book.
No, it wasn't. I remember, I do remember when it came out because we bought it. In fact, it was in the bundles catalog. And I remember sitting, I was with Gene Smith at the time, and we went through it and goes, this is not that great. It was hyped. It was hyped as one of the best, compendiums, and I'm like, no. And even the follow-up books too, and they weren't very good. And W.H. Allen was just throwing a lot of stuff out there, especially around the 20th anniversary. That was right around that time. And they really tried to cash in on it, and it just didn't produce a lot of good material, which is sad.
Have you ever done an episode on just those books by themselves?
No, but there's one planned.
Good.
We're gonna do all the Peter Hannings, and of course you're welcome to join me on that one if you'd like.
Yeah, I have a few I have a few bones to pick with the first book.
Gotcha.
One
we'll
in
do
particular,
that.
so yes.
You heard it here first, folks. That episode will be done, and Tony Whitt will be our guest. So that is fantastic. Okay, so now we get to some of the meatier novels as far as cost, but they skipped April altogether. Nothing came out in April. But in May of 1976, they published Doctor Who and the Revenge of the Cybermen by Terrance Dicks, and that, I do use the word rare. It is one of the rarest hardcovers today. A reprint was done in 1977, according to W.H. Allen, but no proof of life exists. This is one that's not in my collection, and I have not seen one for sale. The last time I saw one was over $1,000 for an ex-library copy. And I'm not even going to take a guess at what a non-library copy would sell for. I don't use the rare word very often, as much as I don't like using it at all, as it's overused in the Doctor Who world. But I'll be honest, I know one person in the world that has a copy, and that's David J. Howe. So, and he's got one in the museum. So
of course he does.
That's about it. Although I've got a book he doesn't have, so that's coming up. But anyway, Revenge of the Cybermen was actually one of my favorite TV stories. But what did you guys think of the book?
Well, no proof of life would probably describe the book itself just as much as it would that second edition.
There we go.
Because, oh my God, I gave it a 2.
Okay.
Dalton gave it a 2.5. Allison and Trey both gave that one a 3, which is interesting. It's one of the few times that Allison and Trey have given a book a higher rating than Dalton or I do, because we tend towards the higher ratings. In fact, at one point, Trey said, "Nothing Dix does here is horrible, but nothing Dix does here is amazing." And it's true. It's a very middling kind of book. So again, it's one of those instances where the books you think would be the rarest are not necessarily the best, and that's probably why they're rare to begin with.
Yeah, and I have a feeling it has to do with the fact that they skipped April in publication and then hit May really hard with Revenge of the Cybermen, because they also skipped June of 76. So that's probably my thought. And also the fact that they list a reprint means that they sold out. And I could not get exact publication figures. I know the Target books, you can get publication figures pretty readily, but they're very sketchy about releasing information about the hardcovers. I've actually put in formal requests to Tandem Publishing, and I said I'd even pay for the copies. If I can find out how many were printed, that might help us out. But there was no interest in helping, and even all that, but we can't even guess how many they did. I only know that the last hardcover they printed, The Smugglers, was so low in print that there are so few of those remaining, and that's actually the rarest hardcover out there, because I've never seen one. It was not distributed to the United States, and only a handful or maybe 100 of them or so were done, because they were wrapping up in hardcover, and they said they were done with that. But however, the fact that they skip a June release and then they go to July, and this is one of the first times they actually published a book in story order, which is what you guys do, and so they did Genesis of the Daleks. Also by Terrance Dicks, another hardcover with dust jacket, and those dust jackets will continue until the early 80s. This is another book that I consider to be impossible to find, and the last one just sold a few days ago for well over $1,000, about 900 pounds, so almost $2,000. So just crazy stuff. Right now, I said they were ex-library copies. This one was also rumored to have a reprint in 1977, but again, no proof of life. And I'll say again, if you have any of these reprinted copies, I would love to hear from you. Send a photo of the inside page so we can use it in our hardcover guide. We'll be more than happy to give you credit for that. Doctor Who Collectors Podcast at gmail.com. Genesis of the Daleks still considers, to me, to be one of my favorite stories. And so what about you, Tony?
It is one of my favorite stories. For Trey Corte, it is not.
Okay.
And in fact, that became part of our discussion in that episode. He actually said it was nothing super special, the novelization. No, actually, Dalton said it was nothing super special, which is
okay.
interesting.
Ah,
So
interesting.
for Dalton tends to be a cheerleader for this sort of story, and for him to say there's nothing super special and still give it a 3, that tells you something. That was such a weird novelization because you have this massive behemoth of a story in terms of its importance in the Doctor Who mythos, and the novelization just sits there. And you think that
Okay.
Terrance Dicks would have been a little more cognizant of how important it was, but it's just not up to his normal stuff.
Oh, interesting. Of course, in 1976, he only did a few books, so that's
Right.
really interesting that he had plenty of time to work on these. Where before they chained him to a desk in future years and said, "You need 30."
Yes, exactly.
And of course, one of the things, and I'll tell my viewers again, or my listeners, I feel like I'm watching a video here, and I'm like, I'm on a podcast. Anyway, one of the things that I found interesting about the Target Book Club podcast is they do the books in story order, which means that the book 1 might have been done in 1974, but the next book might be 1986. So it's interesting the writing styles, how they change, even both books by Terrance Dicks, how their writing styles have changed in the decades. And so that's always interesting to see. And of course, some of the books are shorter, or they've taken more out, or depending on the editors and whatnot. So this is an interesting year. And of course, the paperbacks are coming out at the same time as these hardcovers. So Genesis of the Daleks, the Target book, hit the shelves the same time as the hardcover, and this is one of the few years where that's the case.
Yes.
And we go also to August of 1976. Wingate publishes Doctor Who and the Web of Fear by Terrance Dicks. That is one that I have. I've seen many copies of this hardcover, and it's also have been rumored to have been reprinted in '78 by W.H. Allen. And the reason I know that is this is the reprint. It says Longbow W.H. Allen on the side here, so it's not
So
the
it
Wingate
does.
publication. So this is the second edition. So in the second edition, I've had this book for well over 20 years. So I remember I paid $20 for this book.
Wow.
Today, you might pay about $350 to $400 for a copy of The Web of Fear. The first edition is a little bit harder to find, although there are a few that I've seen out there in the last couple of years. So you might pay about $400 to $500 to $600, depending on the seller, depending on its condition. The first edition has Wingate on the side, so if it says Wingate on the bottom, you've got a first edition. If it says Longbow W.H. Allen, like I do here, and I'll show these on YouTube, so don't worry if you're going, I'm listening to you, I can't see anything. Don't worry, and pictures will be posted on the website, and you'll see all that stuff. And so the second edition is actually the easier of the two editions to find. There were more of these printed. It was also the first story to be considered for another project, a junked project, called the Doctor Who Target Book Collection. And the idea was a magazine was going to be printed every month with a minted copy in hardcover of the Target novelization.
Oh, God. Really?
Yes, and so this particular hardcover, and this is the book that David J. Howe doesn't have, because these are prototypes. These were never put for sale. And when this was offered to me, I jumped at it because I was like, I have never heard of that. So it's the same exact, I'll just hold them up here so you can see them, Tony, but they're the exact same size. The artwork is the same, except you see the Target logo on this one. So it actually has the distinction of being the only classic Target hardcover ever printed.
And I noticed the artwork is also kind of shrunken a little bit so that it all fits onto the cover.
Exactly. So it's a little bit different than the original. And it's also got the distinction of having a reversible dust jacket.
Seriously.
Yeah, I'll pull this one out because this was a very interesting find, and in fact I only know of two that are in existence because another user contacted me because apparently there was a letter that went with it, and he was copying the letter for me and getting it to me so I could have a copy of the letter. And so let me flip this dust jacket off here real quick, And I'll show you the other artwork that's on the cover here. This is the alternate cover on the inside.
Oh my goodness!
So
Oh my god!
So it even
That's
has
such a treat.
It has a black spine with the Target logo on there, but the original, and then of course it has a purple spine with the Target logo.
Oh
And
my gosh!
it's really, it was supposed to be, and of course, and it's by the way, white cloth bound.
Oh, that's lovely.
No imprinting, because this was a prototype.
Oh, impossible to keep clean.
Yeah. Oh, no kidding. I should
You
have
need
worn
the
my
dust
gloves.
jacket.
Yeah.
Right.
I should have put my gloves on. But the
Was
back.
the?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, is the artwork done by the same artist? for
Yes,
both versions?
this is Chris Achilleos on the cover.
Wow.
And he did. Chris Achilleos also did the alternate cover.
And does the alternate cover appear anywhere else except in this prototype? Because
No, it doesn't.
Oh wow!
This is the only place you'll ever see it, and I'll make sure that pictures of that goes up on it as well. It's the reason I didn't reverse the hardcover is all the creases are already done one way, and I didn't want to you crease something too much, then it gets brittle. So I wanted to make sure I kept it. But it came with a magazine that actually went behind the scenes of the book, as far as the artist, the story, the writing, and all that stuff. And so it was a really interesting project. But according to David J. Howe, the project was junked because of the cost
Oh yeah.
of printing X number of hardcover books. And of course, they were going to do this monthly. I'm going to step away from the mic. Let me grab the magazine. It's just over here. And let me plug my headphones back in. There we go. So this is what the magazine looks like, and I'll show this out. It's Doctor Who and the Web of Fear. And they already had planned to do the Zarbi as the next edition. It said in the back of the magazine,
wow.
next month, the Zarbi. And this was sent to a handful of users, or people who had subscribed, or people who may potentially have subscribed to this offer, and they all said they would, but the cost of the project would have made this basically just it wouldn't have made any money.
I'm amazed that they even came up with the idea, because why would they?
Yeah,
I just can't see a point.
I think and there's no date of publication, because again, these are all prototypes, so a lot of the stuff is absent. But I think the thing was they were still trying to, right now, Doctor Who, even today, is a cash cow. And so they were trying to figure out a way to put out a product that people would subscribe to, and that would recoup their costs. But they couldn't come up with a subscription price that would keep up with this demand. And they couldn't figure out how many to print unless everybody prepaid their subscription, basically. So I'm guessing if you were going to pay $50 a month and get this because a hardcover and a magazine, it wouldn't cover a lot of people. That's kind of a pricey subscription. But it made sense to me as far as a product. They're going to put out something. And the inside cover, just the credits that they put in here, I wonder, they do have Target, published by the paperback division of W.H. Allen. It looks like a complete copy of the paperback. And it says here, Target book published in 76, text copyright 76, and that's it. Basically, it's a reprint of what was inside the Target book. And the changing face of Doctor Who, the second Doctor, as they did in whenever they did a book that goes backwards, they did that for the most part. It's the same exact. In fact, the book it's not on the beige paper. I'm just going to hold it up so you can see it. It's on white paper.
Oh wow!
So
that is rare.
So it's really something, and that's why I thought this particular, and like I said, only 2 of these I know exist, so I couldn't even put a value on it. I know what I paid for it, and
which
I'm not
is why David
that.
J. Howe is.
He tried to get one.
That's why David J. Howe is planning your demise.
Probably. Of course, I'll have later this season. We'll have David J. Howe on the podcast for his new book, The New Who Adventures, which goes behind the scenes of the new Doctor Who Adventures, which are the books that followed the Target book series. some of which were made into audio adventures featuring Dr. Bernice Summerfield and the Seventh Doctor. And I have a few of those in the collection, including Lung Barrow and The Dying Days, which are two of the rarest ones out there.
Oh, yes. I have those too.
His book, of course, if you haven't, and just a little plug here, because I promised I would plug it for him, you can go to Telos Publishing and pre-order that book. It is not out yet, but you can put your order in and it'll be shipped out as soon as that order comes in. David usually has a 24-hour turnaround once those books arrive at his home because he operates out of his house. So, so the Web of Fear, of course, just going back to the story, it's one of the, just a story for me that has one of the most iconic lines in all of Doctor Who history. And I'll read it aloud. "I am Colonel Alistair Lethbridge Stewart," said the precise military voice. "How do you do? I'm the Doctor."
What's it want? I wish I knew. The only thing I know for sure is that it brought me here.
Brought you here?
Yes, been wondering how you got here.
Yes, but I don't think there's any harm in telling you now. I have a craft that travels in time and space.
Oh, come now, Doctor. You can't expect...
This craft of yours, this time-space craft, could it get us out of here?
Yes, but it's at Covent Garden.
What does it look like?
It's a police box.
Oh, really, Colonel?
So, if we could rescue that craft, you could take us out?
Yes, I could, but I have to stay here and finish Travers' work.
Doctor. Miss Travers is feeling all right now. I'd like to see her right away.
Very good, Jerry. Excuse me, gentlemen,
Yes.
please.
Well, I've heard some stories in my time, but that one really takes...
So you don't believe him?
No, of course not, sir. The whole idea is screwy. A police box.
Well, whether you think it foolish or not, we are going to rescue that craft.
Oh, but sir, our job...
Captain Knight, the army has failed to defeat this menace. Now, the Doctor thinks he might succeed. Personally, I doubt it. But if we stay here, we're as good as dead. Therefore, I do not intend leaving any escape route unexplored, however screwy you may think it.
Oh, surely, Colonel.
Let's get on with it, shall we, Knight?
Sir.
Probably the most important meeting in Doctor Who history, and and that line is all on its page all by itself. A great story. Tony, what were your thoughts on this story with the podcast?
Well, again, Dalton and I both gave it a 4, Allison a 2.5.
Okay.
And it's one of those interesting moments wherein Terrence Dix knows that he's writing for an audience that already knows who Lethbridge Stewart is. And so in doing the novelization, he completely tells you right at that very moment, of course they would become good friends, so any sort of suspicion there's going to be about him possibly being the pawn of the great intelligence that was in the original televised story, forget about it. You know he isn't, so we're not even going to bother with that plot line in this novelization. And I think it's just lovely. It's very meta, as the kids say.
I read it recently, and I really enjoyed it. In fact, I just put it on the red pile here. I've got a beat up copy of the Target book, and it's a wonderful read. It's a quick read too, which is nice. But it's and I'm excited too because I'm looking forward to the new Blu-ray edition, which has the animated missing episode.
Oh yes,
and that will be exciting to see. By the way, going back to the W.H. Allen hardback, this one of course has on the inside flap the picture of the late Terrence Dix and a little bio, and you can see where it's been checked out from the library. So it's got the library. It's stuck to there. So this was let's see, what library was it from? Oh, it's got the big discarded stamped across it. So somebody had picked this up for a few pounds here. It doesn't have the library name, but it does have a list of other titles in the Doctor Who series. So we're getting towards, let's see, I said this is the part of the summer here. They have already announced future titles for 1977. So let me go through this list here. The Carnival of Monsters, The Seeds of Doom, The Dalek Invasion of Earth, The Claws of Axos, Ark in Space, Brain of Morbius, Planet of Evil, The Mutants, The Deadly Assassin, The Talons of Weng Chiang, and The Face of Evil, which will all be out in the next year. So they've already got their plan. In fact, I saw a copy of Doctor Who in the Ark in Space actually got sold today to a friend of mine in Edinburgh named David Russell. So he was very happy to get a hold of it. I don't know what he paid for it, but it's a really interesting time of the Doctor Who history. 76, 77, the books start even multiplying. No, we go to September of 76. Of course, my birthday was in September of 76, so I turned 8 years old. And if I was lucky, then you could get a copy of Doctor Who and the Space War in hardcover.
Yes.
It was released and was one of the first hardcovers I bought at a convention in 1985. I remember we got in the car and drove up to this little town in Wisconsin. And at the local Ramada Inn, Janet Fielding was the guest. And Gene and I had a table at that convention. We had a third person along working the table with us. And another dealer had this at his table for $20. So I took out my 20 and I said, I want this book. And it happens to be the second printing. So this one was reprinted in 1979. So it has Longbow W.H. Allen on the side. And it's, I'm going to open this up while I talk about it here. The X Library, second printing. The original, I said $20. And the only way to tell this one apart from the first edition is the spine will read Wingate, just simply across the bottom of the spine. And this one has Longbow W.H. Allen. They were actually in 79, they had already phased out the Wingate imprint. And this one, of course, has the Malcolm Hulk biography. It has a big space where the library card was ripped out. And the jacket still has a little bit of tape residue on it, but that's okay. It has a barcode in it, too, so that's really interesting. But it's one of the books, I actually enjoyed reading The Space War. I read this copy, actually, when I got it. It was something to do at... when you're in a small town back in 1985 and you're in a Ramada Inn and there's no such thing as Wi-Fi yet and or devices, and basically while Gene was counting money, I was reading The Space War. Because to save money, the three of us all piled into one hotel room. So it was. That was how we did things. It was definitely. I'm waiting. Somebody had actually offered to interview me for a story about the '80s and what we did, and I'm like, wow, my memory's still pretty good. Gene's is pretty good too. We were chatting the last time I saw him at Chicago TARDIS 2 years ago. We were talking about some of these conventions we did, including one in Elk Grove Village, Illinois, where it was at a high school. And during the convention, a fire alarm went off. And the people said we had to leave. And Gene's like, I'm not leaving. You'll have to carry me out of here. Because he wasn't going to leave. In fact, I'll never forget that convention because we sold more hardcovers at that convention because I had arrived there first and Gene and Matt, who were working the convention with me, got lost. And so all I had with me was the hardcovers. So I had 3 boxes of hardcovers, and they were $20 each. And so I just started saying, okay, hardcovers, $20 cash. And we sold a boatload of them. So by the time he got there, which was like an hour late, we'd already made several $100s in sales. So he was like, oh, that's a good thing you had those. Absolutely. You can expect to pay about $300 for this reprint. I've seen copies of that floating around. In fact, there's a couple out there on Abe's Books already. The reprint, if the original edition, you'll expect to pay a little bit more for. If you can find a non-library copy, those will go for even more money. I love the drawing of the Ogron on the cover too. That's one of my favorite drawings. Chris Achilleos did all the artwork in 1976. And what was the podcast rating on this one?
Dalton gave it a 3.25. Allison gave it a 2.75, and I gave it a 3. So we were really close to one another on this one.
Oh.
In fact, one of us said, well, I'm going to trust you to put the reverb in when I say this, Larry, because this is what I always do in my podcast. Hulk is the strongest there is. And he is. Even when he's weak, this is not one of his better efforts. And yet, we three all kind of shared the same opinion of it, because I think it's, just looking down these ratings, I think this is one of the few times that we were ever within 0.25 of a point of each other on anything. That's unusual on our podcast. There's usually quite a divergence between Allison's ratings and my ratings with Dalton. But this one we pretty much agreed on, and it's that it's still Hulk. It's still good. Not quite his best, but it's still pretty good.
Yeah, and I enjoyed reading it, and I've read it again since then, and I love the last line of the book, and I'm going to read this out loud for the audience here. It says, "The Doctor closed the door of the TARDIS. The Master watched as it dematerialized. Then he went back to the big table and started to collect his star charts and other papers. Oh well," he said to himself, "there's always tomorrow." Which is not what happened on screen.
No. Though I have a feeling that that's Malcolm Hulk having one of his rare moments of sentimentality and trying to give Roger Delgado his due.
Absolutely, because unfortunately, Roger Delgado passed away in 1975, I think. And that was one of the major leading decisions John Pertwee had to leaving the series. And he was very close to Roger Delgado. And just a big loss to the Doctor Who world back then, because I would have imagined, if he had lived, and he would definitely would have been at the '85 convention in Chicago, and that would have been an incredible man to meet. It's one of the Doctor Who, sadly some of the Doctor Who stars died before I had a chance to meet them in person, but he's somebody I definitely would have wanted to shake hands with. At 85, I shook hands with Patrick Troughton. That was my moment there. Wow. And he was an incredible man who actually was bewildered by the fact that nobody had seen his stuff here, but everybody loved him. I said, that's because you were the Doctor, and we love the Doctor. And of course, the other story about that, too, was seeing the Crotons on a big screen. And then after the Crotons ended, Patrick Troughton walked out and did a Q&A. And it was just, I just took it in, and it was just the most amazing thing. And that was the first big convention Bundles from Britain did as a dealer. We had one table, and it was, I guess on Saturday morning, John Pertwee came into the dealer's room and walked right up to our table and looked down and just said, "Look at all this stuff." And at one point, we're just kind of, Gene Smith was there, and we got our jaws dropped because here's John Pertwee at our table. He's picking up a copy of The Cave Monsters, holds it up and goes, "Do you think it's a good likeness?" And pardon my Pertwee impersonation, it's not good. I mean, I need Tim Traylor to do that for me.
You need a little more lisp.
Yeah, a little more lisp with that. But he was so... he had kind of just started wandering around, and then finally, after he spent a few minutes talking to us, his handler showed up and said, "Oh, Mr. Pertwee, we have to go." And of course, that was something that that Gene kind of, he learned about conventions, which is why the Chicago TARDIS convention, I mentioned it earlier in the podcast, we'll be doing an in-person convention this November. And by the way, just added to the list was Michael Jaston. So the Valeyard himself will be there. So with Colin Baker and him, I think that's going to be an amazing Q&A for Trial of a Time Lord. But I digress. But that's one of those things. That whenever I see I see one of these old books that I picked up years ago, I know the story that goes with it and where I was and what I was doing at the time, and of course had no idea it was leading to later stuff. I was a kid, basically, so it was really something else. And then, of course, we get to, in the same month, and this is another time when Wyndham Publishing decided, well, let's do this. Let's do 2 that month and make them in story order because they go together. So we go to Planet of the Daleks by Terrence Dix, and this is a really wonderful copy that I managed to get a hold of in the collection. It is not a library copy. Oh, no, it is a library copy, but it's in very good shape. And it's, got on the back cover, it's advertising Genesis of the Daleks, the 3 Doctors, and the Web of Fear. So it's really quite nice, and it has the Wingate logo, so it is a first edition. It was issued with the dust jacket and the standard Wingate logo, but unlike Space War, this one did not warrant a reprint. So instead, it was included in a release by W.H. Allen in June of 1983 called the Dalek Omnibus.
Yes.
And that is a hardcover that contains several Dalek stories. We actually, Tony, if you remember, you and I talked about that book in our unusual compilations, I think, or something like that some time back. Maybe we did.
Yes.
So it technically did get a reprint, but not by itself. And so if you, and of course, copies of the Dalek Omnibus you can find for $20 out there. There's a lot of them out there. They must have printed up 10,000 of them because there's so many out there for that. But this is very hard to find in non-library condition, which I was expecting. You can expect to pay about $400 for an ex-library. If you have a non-library copy, they're going to go for at least $800 or $900. They're extremely rare. I've only seen one. One of my favorite stories in print, not so much on screen, but I was a little disappointed on screen.
Exactly.
When I read the book and I saw all these wonderful things happening, and I actually saw the story, which I was very eager to see the story anyway, because it was not shown in Chicago as part of the package, because apparently at the time only one of the episodes existed in black and white. So I believe episode 3. So when they did show it, they showed it without episode 3. So there was a lot of head scratching going on when all of a sudden, the doctor was out of prison, and I'm like, what happened? They just cut it all together and pretend we wouldn't notice. But it is one of my favorite stories, and also one of my favorite illustrations. That Chris Achilleos did, that Dalek with the Thal, and he actually captures John Pertwee's expression of, it actually looks like, boy, this thing's heavy. Taking all my effort to move it. But what did the Target Book Club think of this one?
Now, this one is surprising because Dalton and I both gave the Space War 3.25 and 3, respectively. We both gave this one a 3.75.
Okay.
So this was pretty high rated for both of us, and it was higher rated than the Malcolm Hulk novel, which is kind of surprising. Allison gave it a 2, but she actually said on the podcast, it's a pretty positive 2.
Okay.
Because it opens with...
I can hear her voice saying that, actually. It's pretty positive 2. Yeah, I can hear that.
Pretty positive 2. And she said that she particularly liked the disorientation of the opening because she loves a good opening disorientation, and it definitely has that. But it's one of those few instances where you have those 2 books that are sequential, and yet the Dix novel is better than the Hulk one.
Oh,
and
yes.
Definitely better than the televised version.
Yeah, I've read the book several times, and I haven't read the hardcover edition. I've got several Target copies that I've gone through, and I still like to imagine how they did, how, if they had the money, how they would have done it. But after I saw it, I was like, oh man, this could have been.
Pertwee did one of the original audiobooks for this one, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Yeah, and that one is also extremely difficult to find. In fact, any of his, like the Ghosts of End Space and stuff like that he did as the first official audio plays are very difficult to find these days.
But we don't care about those.
Yeah, I know. I listened to your episode on that, so
We didn't make a lot of friends with those.
the Barry Letts experience, absolutely. Just
the very let down experience.
The very let down experience, right? But still, it was. I loved listening to it just for the fact that it was some of the last things that he did.
Yes.
And in Doctor Who, and he was very happy to do them because he kind of distanced himself from Doctor Who for a while after he left, and then came back to it, when the fandom just picked up, and I was just pleased as punch to meet the man. And one of my favorite stories, again, another story about John Pertwee was, I think it was a couple of years ago at Chicago TARDIS, I was on a panel remembering John Pertwee on his 100th birthday, or something like that, and it was an experience I shared where I was at the 85 TARDIS 22 convention, and I was getting in the elevator to go back to my room. And in the elevator was John Pertwee in full Wurzel Gummidge. Character, costume, the straw, and was entertaining everybody in the elevator. And he would say, like, come on in, there's plenty of room in here, stuff like that. And basically entertained everybody up until the final person got off where he could put his key in and go up to the suites, and not be followed. So he just kept his character going. And I shared this story, and at the end of the table, I forgot, Robert Wettendorf was at the end of the table, and he goes, I can confirm that story. I was in the elevator with you. And because Bob and I go back 25, 30 years now, and he was in the many companions of Doctor Who with us, and I'm like, I forgot you were in the elevator with me. I was like, it was a moment that if we had phones in those days, everybody would have been recording it. But you had to have been there to experience John Pertwee in full, and he never broke character. I thought, I still, it's ingrained in my memory, and that's where, I can only tell the story. And now at least I know somebody else has confirmed that story. So that's, I was in the elevator. I'm like, oh, of course you were, because we were heading up to the same, we all shared one room there. That's how we saved money at the Hyatt Regency. So what a great thing. Of course, we come to the final book of 1976, although not the final issue, but the final new printing. In December of 1976, Doctor Who and the Pyramids of Mars by Terrence Dix. I do not have this one. The Planet of the Daleks is the last copy that I have from that year. That is a very difficult year to complete. This was issued with a white dust jacket, very hard to find. I've seen one copy in 20 years. So I can't even put a price on it. In January of 78, however, W.H. Allen lists a second printing, and I can confirm. Thank you to Mr. Steve Redford, who sent me photos of the second printing edition of the Pyramids of Mars, the cover and the inside page, clarifying the second print and with the W.H. Allen logo on the spine. So it does exist. So I always think of the Christmas commercial with Santa and the M&Ms.
Yes,
they do exist. So it does exist.
He does exist!
They do exist.
So that means I would have I've seen one first edition and one second edition in 20 years. This particular story on screen is actually one of my favorite stories for Tom Baker.
Mine too.
It's a really brilliantly written thing. And Sutek is one of my favorite villains from that time. And Sarah Jane was at her best. And speaking of Sarah Jane, by the way, in Chicago TARDIS, I'm also personally looking forward to meeting Sadie Miller, her daughter, who is a guest at Chicago TARDIS this year. She reprises Sarah Jane Smith in the Big Finish audios. She and I had an Instagram conversation not long ago, and she is just extremely excited to come to Chicago and meet with people who met her mother. And I met her mother back in the 80s, so I'm really excited to. I have one autograph of Elizabeth Sladen. It's on a Tom Baker action figure, but she was just a wonderful lady. I know she did a couple Chicago TARDIS conventions when they first started, but a wonderful story. So how did the podcast react to that book?
Dalton and I both gave that one a 3.75, and this time Allison gave it a 3.
Wow.
So I would say
good.
across the board, we all enjoyed that one just as much as we enjoyed Loch Ness Monster. That being said, Pyramids of Mars is definitely one of my favorite stories on screen. On the page, it loses a little bit, but not by much, because
Okay.
Terrence Dix is really giving it the attention that he gave to some of those other books that we like so much. So yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of great Target novelizations in 1976 because they limited it to 10 books. So that was kind of nice. Of course, the last book that comes out in 76 is the reprint of the Loch Ness Monster that I mentioned previously. And that comes out in late December of 76. So that was just in time for Father Christmas to bring it to your house. That actually wraps up 1976. So if you want to own a set of these books, if you can find them, again, a mortgage payment or 2 mortgage payments might cover X library copies. In other words, copies that have been discarded or stolen from a library. If you want first editions, I'm going to have to say that's probably not going to happen. I just don't see them. They're not out there. And I know when I talk about classic hardcovers, and Tony, maybe you've seen some of this in the Target book groups on Facebook, I get a lot of negative pushback from people when I say this is an example of price gouging, when people ask for $1,000 for a book and are like, whoa, hang on, the seller has the right to name his price. I said, absolutely. But when no one buys it, and then you've got to figure out, in my experience with Bundles from Britain and working with Gene Smith and knowing him today, he's not going to put it at a price that isn't going to sell. And a lot of times I'll go to him and go, okay, Gene, how much for this really? He goes, well, it gets a lot of money on Amazon. I said, Gene, it's me. Okay, here's your price. It's reasonable. It's never going to be. In fact, I'll tell you this, a hardcover edition of The Mind of Evil was on the Alien Entertainment shelf a year ago for $20.
Oh my.
And it was from the original bundle stock. It was one of the last couple copies that were left over from the 80s. And he said there was no reason to raise the price on it because, those hardcovers had paid for themselves a decade ago. So it was just, let's just get it out there. Of course, it got snatched up pretty quick, and I'm glad it did. It went to a good home. But my advice, of course, to all collectors out there, negotiate when possible. Like I said, sometimes you might be able to work out a better deal, but beware of initially high-priced auctions. In fact, later in the program, when I do the most outrageous offer, I've got 2 classic hardcovers that really should be examined for their heads for prices they put on them, because they're just not worth that kind of money. And I know personally that both of those books would cover 2 of my mortgage payments. So that's a lot of cash. So that's the 1976. My special thanks to my guest, who is Tony Whitt. I hit the microphone and talk with my hands. Is Tony Whitt. So please tell our listeners where they can find Direction Point's Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast.
You can find us at SoundCloud. Let me try that again.
Sure.
You can find us on Facebook at Doctor Who Target Podcast. Doctor Who Target Book Club Podcast, all one word with no spaces. You can also find us wherever you find good podcasts, including Spotify. And, of course, we are now part of the Direction Point Network, so you can find us there as well.
Absolutely. And along with the Target Book Club podcast at the Direction Point Network, you can also find Police Box in a Junkyard and Time Streams. So it's a new one I just picked up. Time Streams, I just listened to an incredible episode hosted by Nathan Laws, who's I've done a lot of panels with him over the years. I know you know him pretty well, Tony. But they just completely dissected the first season of Doctor Who. And it was a very interesting discussion for very hardcore Doctor Who fans. And it kept me for at least 3 different commutes back and forth. It was an hour and a half, but it kind of kept me riveted to come back to see what they were going to think of the next story. So I definitely, if you're not listening to Time Streams, I would definitely tune into that one. So thanks again, Tony, for being part of the Doctor Who Collectors podcast. And stay tuned, everybody, we have collection protection and the most outrageous offer coming up.
Sad, Red, isn't it? People spend all that time
making nice things, and other people come along and break them.
And now it's time for collection protection. As we talked about classic hardcovers, I want to revisit some of the things that you can do to protect your Doctor Who hardcovers, especially the older editions with dust jackets. The first thing that I go to, of course, is the correct sleeve, a 2.5 mil polyethylene sleeve with no flap. It's not needed. It's called a jumbo paperback sleeve. It's 6 1/8 by 10 inches, but it perfectly fits the Doctor Who hardcovers. Not too snug, so it won't crumple the dust jacket as it goes in, and there's enough room at the top to fold over and seal. And one of the things that I'm switching to than standard Scotch tape is a resealable double-sided tape that you can actually then open the book without worrying about the tape being on the bag and having the tape stick to the book, and then you've got problems there. I also want to point out some additional things if you want to really protect your hardcovers. They have at Bags Unlimited Incorporated, of course. By the way, the jumbo paperback sleeve at Bags Unlimited, the product ID is SPJ. You can get 100 of those for $19.16. Of course, if you don't have 100 hardcovers, you may want to split that bag maybe with another collector, or let us know and we'll figure out a way to help you out there. Other things you can do here, they have what's called rare book storage kits. And these are acid-free, lignin-free, buffered storage boxes, clamshell boxes. You get 5 sheets of microchamber paper, which neutralizes odor, eliminates acids, and harmful byproducts of deterioration. 5 sheets of acid-free tissue paper, filler and acid absorber, and 1 label holder for the box. So you can put your books in these storage boxes. And they come in different sizes, and the one that would fit your Doctor Who hardcovers are the 6 3/4 by 10 1/4 inch by 3 inches. That gives plenty of room in there. And these are not inexpensive. 2 of these will cost you $44.77. It is considered museum grade alpha cell archival. If you really want to protect, I'm considering this option for my my Mueller Doctor Who and the Daleks, and my White Lion hardcover, and my Dutch hardcover edition of Doctor Who and the Daleks, as far as super archival protection to the ultimate degree. So this is not for the casual collector. This is for somebody who's really serious about preserving their books. So again, also with anything, your Target books, your magazines, Bags Unlimited at 1-800-767-2247 or bagsunlimited.com. If you do order from them, please let them know that you heard about it on the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. We don't get anything back, but we want them to know that we sent you there. So that's for our collection protection. We thank Bags Unlimited Incorporated for their many years. I was using them in 1981 when I started collecting, so they've been around a long time. So that's collection protection.
All my travellings throughout the universe, I have battled against evil, against power-mad conspirators. I should have stayed here. The oldest civilization. Decadent, degenerate, and rotten to the core. Power-mad conspirators, Daleks, Sontarans, Cybermen. They're still in the nursery compared to us. 10 million years of absolute power. That's what it takes to be really corrupt.
And now it's time for my favorite part of the program, the outrageous offer, the most outrageous offer. I have a twin pair of outrageous offers here, and I gave a little preview to this earlier in the episode. These are 2 classic hardcover books that were sold on abesbooks.com. One of my favorite places to go, by the way. You can find a lot of reasonably priced Doctor Who books at Abe's Books. Sometimes you find some unreasonably priced books, and these were sent to me by a user who did not want to be named. So both of these books would cover about 2 mortgage payments total, because they're priced exactly the same. And I should point out here, the first one here is Doctor Who and the War Games, which is part of the 1977 releases, I believe. And it is a first edition in a dust wrapper with an ex-library copy with a stamp. to the half title and another to a publisher page. The front free end paper has been neatly removed. The wrapper is a little shelf-worn and rubbed. The book has a few small dents in the top edge, and the board is a little shelf-worn and rubbed to edges. The spine is leaning, and the pages are lightly tanned throughout. The page block ends have a few stain marks that go through to the outer margins of dozen so pages, but text is not affected. The spine is leaning again. This is provided to us by Alder Bookshop in the UK. They've been a seller online just this past year with a 5-star rating. First of all, shipping to the United States for this book is $16.96, and they're asking $1,327.81. I've heard the War Games actually going for a lot higher, but that was for a non-library copy. This is an ex-library copy, so I believe this price is a little outrageous. And priced exactly the same from the same bookseller is a copy of Doctor Who and the Auton Invasion, not the first Wingate edition, but the W.H. Allan reprint, which came out many years later. And this one says here that is a first hardback edition with pictorial laminated boards, no wrapper, though we believe this was issued with this binding. Yes, that's true. And it does not say whether it is an ex-library or new edition. But it's also priced exactly the same at $1,327.81. We've reached out to the seller to ask if maybe there was an error when they were pricing their books or if they just threw that price up there. It seems like a random price to me. And I don't think that the Auton Invasion would fetch that much money either. I believe those books are still out there. We will have the links to these if they're still, in fact, up there. Usually after we publish the podcast, sometimes they disappear. It's amazing to me. But I have copies. I will post, if they did disappear, I have printed out the pages from which they came, so I will publish those. And we'll go from there. If you ever see a outrageously priced Doctor Who book, and I've seen many, even doing this research, finding out these, just send us the link to Doctor Who Collectors Podcast at gmail.com, and we'll investigate that, and we'll put them on the air. If you'd like to be named, just let us know. If you'd rather not, I understand. Just let us know that too, and we will not mention your name. So we believe that Doctor Who collectors' items should be within the reach of the average collector, not necessarily the rich collector. But these two books together, by the way, represent almost $2,700 in investments, which for some, that's a single mortgage payment. For others, it's two, and it seems a bit pricey. Again, so this has been, by the way, the most outrageous offer, and you have been listening to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. Again, a special thanks to Tony Whitt, who joined us today for the deep dive into the 1976 hardcover releases, and all of the people that make this possible. We want to thank, of course, Barry Mason and Les Reed, the composers of Who's Doctor Who, and of course, I always thank Mr. Fraser Hines, who performed that way back in the day, but we use it, and he's been very happy that we have kept that song going today. Before we close out with our ending credits here, again, looking forward to our next few episodes. The next episode, we're going to talk about some Doctor Who items that are unusual from the 1980s, including the Doctor Who telephones and some of the other household items that came out, and we'll have that discussion next time. So again, thank you for listening. Keep collecting.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.